When people hear the word mafia, they think of crime, violence, and blood. But the truth is darker and more complicated. The mafia did not begin as criminals. It began as protection. In the early 19th century, Sicily was a land of chaos. Foreign rulers came and went, each leaving behind a legacy of instability. Governments were weak, corrupt, and distant, their authority barely reaching the bustling cities, let alone the rugged countryside. For the average Sicilian, life was a constant struggle for survival in a land that felt abandoned by the state. The countryside was lawless. Bandits roamed freely, preying on farmers and travelers without fear of reprisal. The formal justice system was a distant dream. Courts were notoriously slow and often corrupt, their verdicts swayed by wealth and influence. Police were unreliable, underfunded, and in many areas, completely non-existent. For ordinary people, justice was not something you sought from a judge or a policeman. It was something you had to find for yourself, or not at all. Imagine living in a world where your safety, your property, and your family's well-being depended entirely on your own strength, or the mercy of those stronger than you. This was the reality for countless Sicilians. There was no one to call for help, no institution to turn to for protection. This power vacuum, this absence of law and order, created the perfect conditions for a new kind of power to emerge, one born not from the state, but from the streets and fields. In this chaotic environment, a new system began to take shape: vast agricultural estates, often owned by wealthy absentee landlords living in cities like Palermo, dominated the Sicilian landscape. These landowners needed to protect their valuable crops, their livestock, and the workers who tended their fields. With no official police force to rely on, they took matters into their own hands. They hired armed local men, often tough and respected figures within their communities, to act as private security. These men, known as gabilotti or compieri, became the enforcers of a crude, localized form of justice. They patrolled the estates, guarded against thieves, and ensured the harvest was collected without incident. At first, their role was straightforward. They enforced order where there was none. They settled disputes between workers, often more quickly and decisively than any formal court could. They punished thieves with a swift and brutal efficiency that served as a powerful deterrent. To the local populace, these men were not just guards. They were arbiters, judges, and protectors. They commanded respect, but also fear. Their word became law in their small domain. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their power grew. They were no longer just employees of the landowners. They became independent power brokers. Protection, once a service they offered, began to morph into something else entirely. It was no longer optional. Over time, this system of private protection began to rot from the inside. The protectors, realizing the power they held, started to demand payment not just for their services, but for their forbearance. This payment, known as the pizzo, was essentially an extortion fee. It was the price of survival. Local farmers, shopkeepers, and artisans found themselves facing a stark choice: pay the men who claimed to protect them, or suffer the consequences. And the consequences were devastating. If you refused to pay, your olive groves might mysteriously catch fire just before harvest. Your most valuable animals might vanish in the middle of the night. Your family might face threats and intimidation. The very men who were supposed to be guarding you against danger had become the greatest danger of all. The protectors became the law. They controlled who could work, who could sell their goods, and who could live in peace. They had become a shadow government, operating outside the state's control, but with far more immediate and tangible power. They were the police, the judge, and the jury all rolled into one. This transformation from hired guards to organized extortionists marked the true birth of organized crime in Sicily. It was a system built on a simple, terrifying premise. Pay us, and we will protect you from everyone else. But the unspoken part of that promise was the most important. Pay us, and we will protect you from ourselves. To survive in this new world, one rule had to be obeyed above all else. It was an unwritten law, passed down through whispers and enforced with violence. Never speak to the authorities. Never cooperate with outsiders. Never betray the group. This sacred, unbreakable rule was called omerta, the code of silence. Omerta was more than just a rule. It was a deeply ingrained part of the culture, a worldview that placed loyalty to the group above all other considerations. It meant loyalty over truth. It meant family over justice, in the most extreme cases. It meant silence over life itself. If you witnessed a crime, you saw nothing. If you were asked a question by the police, you knew nothing. Your silence was your shield. This code was the glue that held the criminal organization together. It made them invisible and impenetrable to the state. Authorities couldn't find witnesses. Victims were too terrified to testify. The wall of silence was absolute, and for those who dared to break it, the punishment was swift and certain. Breaking omerta was the ultimate sin, a betrayal that could not be forgiven. It meant death, often carried out in a brutal, public manner to serve as a warning to others. Under the shadow of omerta, the fledgling criminal groups could operate with near-total impunity, solidifying their power and expanding their control. By the late 1800s, these scattered groups of protectors and extortionists had evolved. They were no longer just local thugs. They were sophisticated criminal organizations with a clear structure, a defined hierarchy, and immense power that reached into every corner of Sicilian society. They had bosses, lieutenants, and soldiers. They had rituals, rules, and territories. They were families, not of blood, but of crime. What began as a desperate solution to lawlessness in the fields of Sicily had grown into a monstrous new form of power. And this power was not content to remain on one small island. It was about to cross the ocean, carrying its codes and its violence to a new world. The Mafia was born in fear. It was raised by silence, and it was fueled by power. In the next episode, we uncover omerta in full, the code of silence that kept the Mafia untouchable for generations and allowed it to become one of the most powerful criminal empires in history. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for the next part of our story.